Bruce Matthews. I'm the interim dean of the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management at Hilo. And we had Dave Sansone come last year, and there were over 200 people. There's been people sitting on the floor and everything for an agroforestry presentation. So we're having them back this time for two conferences or meetings. One dealing with specifically agroforestry for the Hilo and Hamakua area tonight, and then another one dealing with climate change issues in agroforestry in October 19th or 24th. Dave's been real integral in terms of interacting with me and the faculty, discussing sustainability issues, and we've had a lot of interesting discussions about what works at different scales and different environments, and trying to keep all the different things in perspective. And agroforestry is definitely one of the tools in the sustainability toolbox for the tropics. And so I'm just thankful to have Dave here today to give this presentation. I think you'll all really enjoy the presentation tonight. Dave.
Well, thank you all for coming out. There is no microphone, so I'll just project my voice. Okay, the best I can. You might want to sit here also if you want to hear it better. So yes, my name is Dave Sansone, and I own Agroforestry Design, and I do agroforestry consultation and design. And basically, I'm just curious, how many people were here last year? Wow, okay, great. All right. So it's kind of similar last year because it's agroforestry, but I'm taking it from a different angle, thinking about Hilo and Hamakua, what the different issues are. I've gotten to meet a lot of different farmers and gardeners, and it's just different everywhere, just like we're all different. And and talking with Bruce over this last year has been really, really good for me to hear the different aspects, especially the scientific research and what it's indicating. So I just want to say thank you all for coming out tonight, and definitely thank you to UH, the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management for hosting this, and to Bruce and all the staff at the school, because I know they have record numbers of students with record low budget. And so it's a very tough job that they have to maintain the quality of education. So I just want to highlight that and really acknowledge them for having an open mind, but also moving forward with goodness. So I just want to give Bruce this tarot. Last time I didn't get to get into it, and so I just want to say thank you, Bruce. And this is actually part of the theme, though, is my tarot's getting smaller, and it's getting smaller. Yeah, but we'll get into that when we do the slideshow. So yes, that's tonight. We're doing this, and so we're going to talk about strategies and tactics to overcome the weeds, address acidic soil, nutrient leaching, and then reduce our dependence on fertilizers, sprays, and tools. And then, like Bruce said, we will be doing another one Friday the 24th of October, same room, and we'll be talking about climate-smart agriculture from an agroforestry perspective. Just to do a little promotion for other folks, Natural Farming Hawaii, the Korean Natural Farming Group meets the second Tuesday of every month at the Aupuni Center in the Drake Wyman over there. Feel free to chat with him to learn more about it, but it's, I have the September date, sorry, Jake. And then also, Keiki Kalo is a project that I'm involved with where we're developing integrated agroforestry models for Hilo and Hamakua, and it's an interesting mix of Hawaiian cultural practitioners, agroforestry and permaculture specialists, Korean natural farmers, including Drake, and then conservation farming with native species. So it's really a well-balanced group trying to look at the needs from different angles, and using all the tools in the toolbox that we have available to us. So the first project we're working on is pig forage and fodder systems, and this is really to support the Korean natural farmers, because the piggeries have been a real success, but we've had trouble with growing the food because we're kind of overrun with weeds here, right? That's one of the big issues. So And then also Makahiki. So my buddy Lake Trask, he sent me this flyer, and so I'm just promoting it. If you all want to check it out, feel free. It's going to be on November 28th to the 30th down in Hawaiian Village, Puhi Bay. All types of great stuff, and there will be the biggest taro competition, so you've got a big taro waiting to harvest. And then also rare edible plant prizes as well. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just give you a little background about where I'm coming from and just, let you know where I'm at. So I like to start this way. So who knows what these 4 species have in common? And please raise your hand and also turn off your cell phone. That'd be great. They're also hands really specific. So does anyone know what these 4 species have in common right there?
Are they endemic to Hawaii?
They're endemic and?
Endangered.
What? Oh, he raised his hand. You gotta raise your hand. All right, well, we've got a winner here. Yes, they're endemic and endangered, and it's rather sad. But actually, we're here tonight and we can find out what we can do about it. So what we're going to be doing throughout the evening is giving away some prizes, make it more exciting. So where do you live? What's your climate?
We live in Oki'i, Cal.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Perfect. Speaking of endangered, wait, you're not on the water. All right, here we go. We'll give you some sugar cane. Yeah, this is a Hawaiian sugar cane. It's the red, green, and gold variety. I don't know the name for it, so if you want, just come and get this. And so if you win something, come on down and get it. So yeah, they're endemic and endangered. And here on Hawaii Island, this is endangered island or extinction island in a way, because there's so many endangered species. There's been record numbers of extinctions, and right now we are living through the 6th great extinction. And it's a period of time where we have mass die-offs of species, which is basically due to many reasons. It's been going on for about 10,000 years, but it's basically agricultural clearing is one of the main issues, because where we grow our food, there's usually no native species, right? So when I found out about the 6th great extinction, I decided I wanted to do something about it, so I went to go work on an organic farm, and this was in Washington State. And Cedarville Farm is really an amazing place. A farmer had been farming for about 25 years when I started working for him, and I apprenticed for 2 years. And had an excellent apprenticeship, and I learned a lot, but really the first day, I learned the most. And what he said just blew me away. He basically said, he asked me while I was there, and I said, I want to learn how to live sustainably. He said, well, actually, we're not sustainable. Because we use tractors, fossil fuels, we use mined fertilizers, we use factory farm leftovers like blood meal, chicken manure, whatnot. And so he opened my eyes to the realization that our agricultural processes are actually what's causing many of these problems. And this is an organic farm that was very well run. He was a wildlife biologist, so we would see eagles in the field occasionally. So he really set me on this path, and if it wasn't for him and a number of other people along the way, I wouldn't be here right now. So after Cedarville, I kind of took a break from farming for a bit, and then got back into it and did permaculture guild development, basically working with about 500 species over the years, developing methods of growing plants together in a way that support each other. And so over the years, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So I'll tell you about that more in a second. So I worked at Cascadian Farm for a while, did native tree restoration along the Skagit River for the salmon and the eagle, really for everything. But so that farmer, he told me, if you want to learn about how to, do a little bit less work, because the weeding was really difficult, right? It's just a lot of weeding, get your food. And, I wasn't raised in agriculture, so I just felt like there should be something else. So he said, look into Masanobu Fukuoka, look into permaculture, and as he said, look into the way the Indians lived, because in the Pacific Northwest, that's generally how Native Americans call themselves as Indians. So I looked into Masanobu Fukuoka, and he has a number of books, The One Straw Revolution, and he has the idea of this do-nothing philosophy, which, it's kind of a strange idea for growing food, but what he realized is that He was actually an agricultural inspector, and he was trained in agricultural science. And what he noticed one day was when he was walking home, he noticed this old field of rice with a full head of grain on it. It was, just some rice growing in the field there, and he thought, wait a second, no one's done anything in there for years, and there's rice growing. Meanwhile, doing all this work, putting all these inputs, having to do all this weeding, and if I'm lucky, I get a head of rice that looks so good. So he started doing experimentation, and he developed a system that has really revolutionized much of agriculture. He also worked with permaculturalist Bill Mollison. But his motto was no tilling, no fertilizing, no pruning. The idea is to do as little effort as you can to get the most out of it. So I thought, that's a good idea, but what I realized was that in my early experiments, his ideas are from a very certain place, very certain conditions. And for anyone, has anyone tried doing the no-till farming, out of curiosity? No-till gardening?
Yeah.
And what would be the biggest challenge with that? Grass, weeds. Yes, yeah, that's the biggest problem, right? No-till means you got all these weeds. No weeding is his other philosophy. But I think if as long as you're not fundamentalist, trying to do it exactly one way, you can take different aspects and then guide it towards what you want to do. So I looked into permaculture, did this permaculture research, worked with about 500 species. Over the years, I had grown I had year-round salad greens with no greenhouse. They're basically perennial greens that were extremely high nutrition. They could survive under 6 feet of snow. All types of diversity, including yams and gingers that are hardy in northwestern Washington, up in the mountains. So it was a really great experience for me. But what I learned, and I apprenticed at this place called the Feral Farm, as in domesticated, gone wild. And basically his take on permaculture was that it's based on indigenous systems. And if anyone reads the permaculture books, you get the idea that they're basically, as I put it, cherry picking from different indigenous cultures, different aspects, and then putting it into their system. So agroforestry is a new word for a very old practice. And there's basic, how can I put it? Well, there's the original agroforestry, which is basically the indigenous agroforestry, but Western science has a tendency to specialize, right? We focus in on things, and because of that, there's aspects that are removed from the original culture. And so the original culture, I'm just going to call it traditional ecological knowledge. It's a common phrase about that, but the land care and agroforestry is a part of that. So it's basically integrating agricultural crops with trees. But there's so many different ways to bring in species and sites to develop your own system. So it's tough to say it's, put it in a box, except for agricultural plants and trees. The picture that you see here is a tribe that is uncontacted. They have not had contact except for some overflights by planes just to document them so that they are protected. And they are traditional forest gardeners. And you'll notice that there's a lot of diversity down there. They have papayas, they have bananas and peanuts, cassava. And when they shift their agriculture, it's a shifting agricultural system, the forest regenerates. So it's a great example of their system. When they leave, it reverts back to this beautiful forest, and actually very often a food forest. Their long-term trees are what's going to remain there. And so it's developed under increasing population, decreasing resource base. And really that's like much of the world today, right? So if we go to another location, Kerala, India, one of the highest population density in the world. And this is a little bit old data, so this is not up to date, but basically I think it was in '93, they were number 2 in Asia Quality of Living Index. Very long lived, they had gender equality. 90% of people own land, and $400 a year is what they do it on. unrestrained, right? So the paradox there is answered with the forest gardens. And it has been changing from what I hear. It's not the same. There's definitely a Western shift. But basically, it just goes to show that this forest gardening, agriculture, or agroforestry way of life can support people in remote rural locations, very pristine, but then also in very dense populations as well. And that's the southernmost state in India. If we go up to Mumbai, Bombay, that's another spot with extreme density of people, and we have basically the complete opposite. In terms of their quality of living, they're more or less at the bottom. And that is a very old agricultural society. And I offer this photograph here just to illustrate, you know, we have some problems in our society today, which we don't really see that much, but they're there. And we have them. So that's part of the reason why I do this work, is to help us figure out ways to help the nature, but also help each other, right? Because after all, we're a part of the nature. So who can tell me what that plant is over here? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you got a edible hibiscus.
What's it edible hibiscus?
Edible hibiscus, yeah. It's a great perennial salad green. It's a bush crop. It grows kind of tall. You just stick it in the ground and it grows. So I really like that though. I thought, wow, look at that. You know, despite that chronic poverty, they're still growing whatever they can in this little tiny spot. So with that said, you know, when things are tough for us, there's always opportunities. So let's look at other cultures. And what I'm going to do really quick is just jump through a few different traditional cultures to show the different traditional agroforestry systems, which this photograph here was recently taken by Dr. J.D. Friday, who's part of UH. And he described it as basically that the people there, if the Westerners leave, you know, if the boat doesn't come, it doesn't affect them at all because they have the food they need. He said every inch along the road has plants that are intentionally put there. So what he said was basically the culture over time has picked and chosen the plants and strategies. They basically collected new tools in their toolbox to refine their agricultural system, rather than, you know, thinking of it as like some Stone Age relic, as we're taught in the textbook. No, it's moving forward in the future. And it's such a great one. I mean, if we had this along the Puna coast, think about that. If we had the coconut windbreak, which was here before, then you would have, the coconuts are very strong. You've got the coconut with the water up there, so there's our pure water after the hurricanes come. And then there's the swamp taro, which is salt tolerant, as well as the coconut. So it's a site-adapted system. He said it's just meters away from the ocean. So it's another thing that's happening is here in Hawaii, and I have a little asterisk because it's kind of like, I have to be careful about talking about cultures, especially here. And the best way I can put it is after working with a number of Hawaiian cultural practitioners, is basically blending the best of the past with the best of today and working towards a better future. And that's with Pohaha Ikalani. They're a nonprofit that is working to revitalize Hawaiian culture through the restoration of the Napopo village and the Lo'is that are down there in Waipio Valley. And so you see here they're utilizing the weeds around there. They're you know, a bunch of invasive weeds, but they're basically now fertilizer. You can see them laying down there, fertilizer and mulch. So it's a great example of, you know, rather than, you know, just sticking with something that someone wrote in a book a long time ago. No, it's an active, it's a culture, right? Cultures are always growing and adapting. And so, yeah, I don't really want to, there's always the chance for misrepresentation and misunderstanding, right? So I'm just putting this out there in terms of just what I'm picking up, but it's always open for interpretation. So, with that said, Hawaii basically set a standard that has rarely been reached around the world in terms of sustainability. The use of green manures, mulches, set-adapted species and varieties, and then systems adapted to address those site limitations. And this is where Bruce has really helped me to understand the nitrogen, potassium, or phosphorus, potassium, calcium, moisture, slope and elevation aspects. And really the calcium is, a pretty big deal here, right? I think most gardeners know that. You gotta throw your line down is what we're taught. But that's not the way I work, because I thought, from the beginning, wait a second, if I have to go buy stuff like lime and fertilizer and fuel, what will happen when there's no more fuel? Or, and when I first got into this, it was right around Y2K. Does anyone remember Y2K? You all laugh. Yeah, I was working on a farm, we were canning food, getting ready for basically, what it did for me though is I thought about it. I thought, well, what happens if the electricity stops? And that was the big fear, right? The computers crashed because they didn't think that far ahead, to where they didn't program their computers to be able to hold the date over 1999. And so there was a lot of concern about everything collapsing. So it really helped me get going, and so I've been pretty rigid about not bringing in inputs. And because of that, my gardens over time have had nutritional deficiencies. And that's a good thing, because what that does is those plants are telling me that there's an issue, and then now I have to go find, what is the solution that's around me. And that's basically the indigenous model, is it not, right? It's what's around you, you make the most of it, but also having a relationship with it. So it's not just taking what you can get out of it, but more it's an exchange usually, right? So the Loki system, basically wetland agriculture, there's mushrooms and fish farming that can happen in there. Fish ponds, which offer nutrients that feed the algae and limu, the seaweed, and that is fish food. So that fish pond now serves as a nursery for the fish in the ocean, cleans the water as the fish, or as the limu and the fish are harvested, and that itself is what I would consider a passive system. And this is really what I want to emphasize, passive versus active, right? Yin versus yang. So passive meaning the ahupua is a whole system in itself, but there's all these benefits, all these functions, all these things that are coming out of it that weren't necessarily intentionally put into it, if that makes sense. But so you put it all together, you have a very productive system. You also have great social equity, so access to land and resources, health, freedoms, and massive numbers of fish, 3 times more fish than what scientists consider to be sustainable harvest nowadays. And there's a good amount that I've learned recently, which is not really for me to share, because it's, there's a lot of traditional knowledge, and that knowledge is local based and it's passed on through culture and family, and part of that is protecting that knowledge. But it's a whole way of life that basically stewards the landscape. So you bring it all together, it makes the place run well and protect the land and the water, and basically enriches people. So now today we have our Western Agroforestry system. And basically if you go to agroforestry.net, who's heard of agroforestry.net? Has anyone checked it out? Okay, a few. I highly recommend it, because Craig Elovich and Kim Wilkinson have done a lot of work, and they're on the island. So yeah, check it out. I think you'll really appreciate it. So basically it's a Western style specialization using needs-based assessments, so just hearing what the farmers need, people on the ground. Then we have farmer extension and researcher interaction. And then using science to intensify the production, basically. And intensification is a part of traditional agroforestry, where basically, as technologies develop to interact with the resources, when people develop ones that work really well, one example would be a weir, which is basically a dam across a river that funnels fish into one area, and the Coast Salish tribes in the Pacific Northwest were able to funnel the salmon into a small area and then do selective breeding by harvesting the smaller ones and then letting the big fish go up. Over time, it bred bigger and bigger fish. That intensification grew more and more as the climate changed. It was a cooler, a warmer, drier climate. They had this one species, let's see if I can say it, Pteridaria gardneri, an endangered species related to the carrot, which is a relic from that ancient ecosystem of the warmer, drier climate. It was like Northern California. Climate shifts, cedars come in, salmon come in, people are harvesting the salmon, they develop their systems and they intensify it, and then their whole culture becomes this, I forget what's the term that they had for it. They're basically this anomaly within anthropology. They couldn't understand how these people had such a wealthy society where they had high art, which is one of these things that, people who study cultures, when you have a high art, that means that you have a specialized society. It's usually associated with agricultural societies, but they basically intensified, create this production, and as a result, they had all these benefits, including beautiful art, and then lots of delicious fish. So in the remote poor areas, we have more green manure use, and it's more hand-based, animal-based, whereas here in the more developed areas, it's more about the tractors and trees, more alley cropping, like nut trees and grains for a while, or pasture and trees. And there's many studies, and I highly recommend you check out my website, agroforestrydesign.net. I offer lots of links that show the production. And those are for well-designed systems. It takes time to develop them. So, if you're going to give it a try, just, you start small, work your way up, because that's the way that has worked for a long time. So generally speaking, they're more reliable because you have more than one crop. As they say in India, when people are promoting this, at least you won't starve. Because when the crop fails, there's no food. So you can have other foods, you can have other things to sell. It's more ecologically sound. We get better nutrient cycling and improved soil conditions with less fertilizers and sprays. All right, so I just want to, I'll show you this slide, and I want to open it up for a little bit to get your input about what your issues are, and then I'll jump back in, and then we'll see if I kind of have an idea where you're at. But so this is a slide of basically this was a dirt road, and I took the streets back and basically planted a garden there and put down the IMOs, indigenous microorganisms, and planted a bunch of stuff, and we see here a jackfruit that's about, it's almost as tall as the ceiling now, maybe like 12 feet tall, and it's been in the ground for about 2.5 years or so. And I really have been blown away by this garden. It's one of my nicest spots in my garden, and I haven't had to do much at all because the plants take care of it. They all fill the space. It's really a beautiful thing, and the microbes that grow below the natural mulch that falls, they're the ones that do a lot of the fertilizing for me. So, with that said, how about we just open it up, and if you want to just, what do y'all think, what do we need to think about here in Hilo and Hamakua? Don't be shy.
Weeds.
Weeds. Why not bluegrass?
Why not bluegrass?
I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
That's that one comes up.
Anyone else?
pH and nitrogen loss.
pH and nitrogen loss. Yes, yes.
Acid soil.
Acid soil, yep.
The term I've heard dead soil,
Dead soil.
and it's attracting snails.
It's attracting the snails.
Somebody told me it attracts snails.
Okay.
Clay.
Right.
And
Leptospirosis.
sclerosis, and the rat.
Rat lungworm, yeah.
Fire ants.
Fire ants. You know, I was tempted to get into, maybe we'll get into that, because there's a potential thing that I can see as a possibility, but I don't really want to get into it because it's, you know, I shouldn't be saying something that I haven't really proven yet. Okay, anyone else?
And the cane properties in Hamakua all have a residual arsenic, I think.
Okay.
Wild pigs.
Pigs.
Do you actually do soil improvement before you, because, you know, someone said clay. Well, clay is the greatest thing we got going, as long as you amend it. Is that a step you do before you actually,
Well,
you rely on the phytus that's created to,
for me, I don't use anything in my garden, but for when I work for other people, it all depends on the situation. If someone's gung-ho on getting things to go as quick as possible, then okay, we're going to do that. But and here's a quick note: we don't really have much clay. It looks like clay, but it's actually a silt loam, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So, anyone else? Let me.
What about like maybe negative side effects of all the eucalyptus forests that have been planted? Maybe some kind of chemicals like tannins that might harm plants or something like that, if they're used for like building soil.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed about those eucalyptus forests, the understory is like nothing else. I mean, there's like one type of grass that seems to grow, and that's about it. You know, so there's something about them that just doesn't seem kosher for sure.
Can't hardly find an ant in them, and I once found a bird perfectly preserved in the duff from the gas and of the oils.
Wow.
Yeah, not an ant, nothing would chew on it. It was just in there mummified.
All right. You know, here's a quick one I actually learned from my buddy Zach Mermel up there. He said you can grow shiitake on eucalyptus.
Really?
Yeah, so the shiitake mushroom is a pretty choice gourmet mushroom.
On old logs?
Yeah, you got it. Well, it's not old logs because they're going to be inoculated by some other mushrooms. So you have to cut it and then inoculate it within a certain amount of time in order for it to get your mushroom on there.
Okay.
But you know, those trees are a nice windbreak, aren't they? I say it now because, you know, when those trees are gone, it's going to get a lot windier in the Hamakua. So here we go. Here's a long list of things. I'm just going to read through it really quick. Because these are things that are addressing or affecting farmers and gardeners here with our different issues. So it's all based, really it starts with where you're at, what your land's like, what your goals are, and what your practices are. That's going to determine what the issues that are going to affect your system. So basically we're losing lots of nutrients and amendments as it rains a lot, right? We get all this rain and the fertility just washes away. We're also, we have these increasing input and labor costs. So the price of farming is going up substantially. Now we're here in this very remote location, so with all the additional costs of shipping, it really affects the farmers. Then we've got our pests and diseases. Rat lungworm is one of them. We've got our lots and lots of weeds, including our wainaku. I mean, we're counting wainaku, right? So it's, then we have our acid, and I say dead soils. They're not necessarily related. I was just trying to cram it all on this sheet here, but we do have our acid soils, very acid soils. We also have our biologically dead, or basically places that have been, you know, farmed for quite a while, often with cane or other practices. But the nice thing is there are things we can do about it, natural things. So, you know, here in Hilo, there's areas with no soil. Then we have our too much rain, and then other areas, like up towards Hamakua, barely any rain for a good chunk of the year. And then also the irrigation system failing up there. So farming is getting more difficult up there. Our bees are in jeopardy. We have a lack of pollinator habitat. We have compaction on the doe's land. That's a very common land clearing strategy. It's like, just get off there quick. And what's amazing is sugarcane does very well on a bulldoze. Where a big machine goes, you throw sugarcane down there, it's going to fix itself pretty quick. So it's kind of like an adapted plant for the
And
traditional
stays
system.
for generations.
Yeah, it's still residual. It's all over the place. So as a result, though, we get anaerobic soil. We get micronutrient deficiencies as the topsoil is pushed off. That's where a lot of the micronutrients are. And then the pH gets lower as it gets leached out, or as the calcium or the hydrogen ions get leached out. So we have erosion from those really heavy rainfalls, right? It pours, and then the water runs down the mountain. It's like a lake on the mountain, and that's when we really get the worst erosion. And the soils, a lot of the soils are actually pretty good. They're not too erosion prone, but that's really what gets it. So we have our native species fragmentation, our flawed land tenure system. Yeah, I'll just get into that a little bit. I feel like there's a lack of understanding about Hawaiian protocol, which basically, this island is extremely sensitive. All islands are very sensitive. It's a unique ecosystem, and so just any outside influence really has a big impact. But over time, this short-term leasing is basically degrading the land because there's no incentive to improve the land with long-term crops. We have conversion to ag to residential. The global real estate market affects everyone, but also Hawaiians in Hawaii, right? So there's a number of issues that I see the broader picture and I see the connections, but I'm going to try to stay focused here. So we're going to jump into marketing challenges. We've got more crops, right? We have more opportunities, but it also takes more knowledge.
What do you think about biocontrols?
Biocontrols. I'm not really a big fan of introducing pests because they can adapt. They can. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm more about promoting life. But I know here it's kind of difficult because we don't have the plants or the animals to keep certain other things under control. So it's not really something I've really spent a lot of time working or thinking about. But we got a lack of awareness about agroforestry, its relative youth, lack of proven sustainable agroforestry systems in Hawaii, a lack of immediate results with these systems often, lack of support from the state and the U.S. government, with some exceptions. And UH has definitely been doing work over the years. And then our farm conditions. It depends on your farm. Some pay well, and then others resort to forced labor and slavery, as has been seen over on Oahu. And then nowadays we have a dependence on woofers, which, if it's an educational situation, that's great. And if it's a sharing mutual situation, that's great too. But anything that we rely upon is a dependency. So to build a house, you got to start with the foundation, right? So let's think about what's under our feet. So we've got our climate zones, first of all. So let's basically, here we've got our continuous tropical, tropical continuously wet climate. Up higher it's cooler, up towards Hamakua it's drier, tropical monsoon. And there's all these different conditions created by our climate, the soil odor, the elevation, the distance from the ocean, rainfall, slope, drainage, pH, organic matter, soil series, life forms, so the biology, including previous generations. So what's happened in the past affects the land today, and then us, right? Because we have that relationship. So when we think about our soil orders, that's basically, there's, 12 soil odors around the world. And here in the Hilo Hamakua area, we've got basically 4, where the first one is lava flow, right? That's where we're gonna start, where there's really no soil. We got some issues there, right? It's kind of a challenging place to grow, one would think, but there's opportunities. The histosol is a newer soil, and it's really often like, if you've been around Puna, it's like that really organic, mattery soil that it's on top of rock. It actually can be very rich if it's not too rainy there. But it is more prone to erosion if you clear the vegetation or bulldoze it. It's just going to oftentimes wash away. If it's on lava or if there's cracks in the Pahoehoe rock. So then our andesol, the inceptisol. So that's up towards Hamakua, and there's minimal development of the soil horizons. But today I really want to focus on the andesol because that's our largest soil order. As you can see there, that's a purple blotch up there. And within our andesol, okay, right. So now we've got our rain. And generally, the more rain you get, the more acidic you're going to be with less nutrients. And you'll also tend to go into a situation that would be phosphorus fixation. Slope has an effect. So here's the exception where there's areas, actually I'll jump into that in a second. So if you look close, you see a lot of these white things, right? These are all the gulches. So in the gulches, it's steeper. Meanwhile, there's other areas that are flatter. And where it's steeper, things run away. Where it's flatter, things accumulate. If it's a very well-drained soil, like much of the andesols, then you're more likely to lose your nutrients. If it's not very well-drained, you're more likely to hold on to them, but it's going to be a little bit more mucky. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to get focused mainly on the andesols, but I figured, okay, I'm here in Hilo, I'm sure someone around here doesn't have soil, so here's a few strategies. There's a great thing that Bruce tipped me off on that was on the Agroforestry.net website. It's casing wall agroforestry, where basically what they're doing is pollarding the weed trees, going and cutting them about 4 feet high or so, leaving overstory trees that are desirable. And overstory trees are basically larger trees on like an extra wide spacing. And what they figured out is after they have to fertilize for about 3 years, and then after that, they're able to nutrient pump it with those deep-rooted trees dropping in a leaf litter. They're mining from below, dropping the leaf litter, and then people show up and then pollard those weed trees or whatever trees that they had cut down low. Some of them have a regrowth. Then that is going. They go and cut that down over and over, and that builds up the organic matter on the soil. It's a great strategy if there's not much soil, you're on rock. If you take those roots out, if you bulldoze it, you lost what was there. Whereas if we go and cut, not everything, but cut the weed trees, it's a great use of those weed trees turned to fertilizer. Then you can keep your nutrients, but it takes time for them to break down. So we've got rain gardens below our gutters. Raised beds are an excellent way where there's no soil. If there's a hole, a puka, or you can make a mound garden and put sweet potatoes in there. They're adapted to low soil conditions. Trees with extra wide spacing and ground cover, and stick mulch. And I'll get into stick mulch throughout the evening. And that's basically what is left when you cut those trees over and over. That makes stick mulch. If you cut them higher, you get more wood. If you let them grow longer, you get more wood. If you cut them lower and cut them more often, you're going to have more leafy material. So yeah, grow your soil and mulch with native trees and nitrogen-fixing tree mulch forests. You can plant out a whole forest and then go and cut it down occasionally. And I say don't ever cut to the ground. If you cut to the ground, you're probably not going to be able to kill the tree. Always leave a stump, and then you can take an oval bar and scrape the bark off the bottom, or a machete or something. When you do that, you girdle the tree. What that does is it doesn't have the ability to send the nutrients up the tree. So it's a really important thing. When we cut it down to the ground, it's going to become a nightmare for someone in the future. So yeah, add soil, but look out for little fire ants. Haukipukas, so basically nature creates its own soil, right? Do you ever notice in the forest how the soil is nice, you know, it's organic matter, beautiful soil. So in some locations, say like an area that's like got water running through it, you know, if you put logs in a certain way, you can build erosion control traps where the sediments come to you and then take that and put it in the garden. Fertilize heavily with kukui. It happens to be high in nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, and sodium. And calcium, magnesium, and sodium are, anyone know what those are? Those are the hydrogen ions. That's so when you measure pH, they say, oh, you know, I have acid soil. That means you have low pH. Throw your calcium on there, or your dolomite, which is calcium and magnesium. That's basically what is happening. When you want to increase your pH, you're putting down the hydrogen ions. There are other ways to do it though. So you can use hala or runners. Runners are the ones that do the work for you, right? When you plant a garden, what's the one that gets us? The grasses, right? The grass is always running there. So we got to mimic nature. We got to overcome and get the other plants in there, and the runners will do that. So the running taro will do it. So if you don't have enough rain, do your, that's up in Hamakua, site adapted systems and species. So that means keyline design. That's a part of permaculture. It's its own system, but permaculture adopted it. Swales on contours. Swales are basically ditches going across the hill with a big mound on the downside. That'll catch your water. When you have erosion and you slow it down, that erosion moving through water will then weather the soil. And when there's weatherization, that's one of the ways in which fertility is released from soil. So now we can turn erosion into fertilizer. And I'm making some generalizations. I'm not a scientist. So I'm just, trying to put this in ways that we can all understand, but I'm sure, someone who has more technical understanding would possibly have some issues. So please talk to me later on if you disagree. So then we have our windbreaks to slow, we don't want to dry the place out. We have our shade, our mulch, our tree crops, our biochar. Biochar is a big one. Microbes, flood irrigation. Look out for irrigating in areas where it's very dry, and we don't irrigate very much, there's mineral salts that build up in the soil. That's part of what caused the Garden of Eden to become a desert, or from what people are talking about. It's basically the salts build up in the soil, and if you're not adding enough water to flush the salts out, then you're going to have a buildup, and then it basically makes it so that the salts pull the water out of plants. Luckily for Hamakua, it does get a heavy rain. It does rain for a couple months. It probably washes all out, but it is an issue on the other side of the island, probably. So then reforest with rainmakers, and kukui is a rainmaker. So now, if you look at the bottom left there, andisols form about 0.7% of the Earth's known soil resources. Not much. And they're basically around the ring of fire, so they're volcanic associated. And here's the opportunity. If you get plants from the similar parent material, the similar soil order, sometimes, as we noticed up in Washington, the plants from Hokkaido, north of Japan, did very, very well for us, and we just happen to have a very similar soil. So once we noticed that, we started to say, okay, let's get more from there. And so many of them did really well. So it's a way for us to look out for uncommon domesticated plants, because usually those are not the ones that are going to become weeds, and they're food. And the uncommon ones are the ones that usually, if they're not really marketable, then there's not as much of an incentive for people to move them around. So, yes, we have a volcanic ash or cinder origin for our andesol soil. Down low, the Hilo soil series, which is the state soil series. It's one of the largest, if not the largest soil series. And it covers all types of slopes, it's well drained, moderately acidic, with exceptions. Then we go up in elevation. The Kaidiki soil series is what I live on. And John, that's yours too, yeah? And that is found at the summit, the shoulder, and back slope positions. It's well drained with a pH of 4.7 to 5.5. Akaka soil series, it's moderate drainage, can hold more water than soil. And the pH is a bit lower, 5.4 to 5.3. And then Otoman, minimal slope, and it has moderate to very poor drainage, so it's a mucky soil, and you'll notice that the pH is higher because that fertility didn't get washed away. What's interesting I found is that with all these well-drained soils, except for down low for some reason, but when they did the soil testing around the island, you'll notice that the surface was lower pH, and then as it went further in the soil, the pH went up. Now, I don't know the exact science behind it, but it seems like it's going down, right? And for growing plants that are only going to be this deep, there's a lot of fertility we're not reaching. A lot of calcium or hydrogen ions we're not reaching. Acid soils are a major issue throughout the tropics and subtropics. And that's the red, all the red area there. So our pH is basically a measurement of the hydrogen ions, and it's so complicated for me to give you the specific definition, negative logarithm, or I don't know. But basically, here's a chart for you where once you start getting below a 5.5, does this thing work? Oh yeah, great. So basically, we look up 5.5, start going down, when you hit 5.4, really at 4.7, you're going to have issues, because right when you get there, you'll see the calcium, magnesium, it's getting smaller, getting smaller. As that happens, we start losing the available fertility. So that's why people throw a line down, because if you don't throw a line down, you have this acid condition. Most of our plants can't get the fertility because it's fixed, it's locked up, or it's just not there, because it's been washed away. So there's natural causes like excessive rainfall, weathering, plant root activity, such as albizia, VOG, sulfuric acid, acid rain, and previous land interaction. So my buddy Keahi, his land has a 4.7 pH, and it's a Hilo soil series, which has a higher pH. So it's like, well, what happened there? So I was thinking about, okay, well, what are the possibilities? Mine tailings? That could make the soil acidic, but probably not there. Sugar cane, right? We got our pollutants, the dozers. The dozers definitely do a number. Not cover cropping causes issues, especially at higher elevations. That's where we start having aluminum toxicity. As we go up, as the pH goes up, we start having aluminum toxicity, which I'll get into in a sec. So then if we continue to do no soil covered and spray, we have these buildup of issues, and then more likely to have resistant weeds and possibly aluminum toxicity. And then here's, I think, the real issue for Keahi's place. Repeat fertilizer with no organic matter, microbes, or lime. So if we throw fertilizer down without lime, or something else to buffer it, like organic matter or microbes, then what will happen is that fertilizer is acidic. We throw it down, unless it has, like, if it's buffered with some calcium or something like that. But basically, if you continue to throw fertilizer down, it's going to make the soil more acidic. That makes it so the plants aren't going to want to grow. And so it's this weird situation where one might be tempted to throw more fertilizer down, which might make it worse. And I think with the increasing cost of everything, I think this might be an issue you see more and more as people not familiar with that issue would just try to go for the fertilizer.
It's also an issue for landowners and people who are leasing land, because you're going to have people who lease the land, do this stuff, and then you're going to deal with the problems after.
Yeah.
I'm Johnny, by the way.
Yeah, that's so true.
I have a farmer friend who tells me that he puts coffee grounds down, and he says it's really good for worms, but my understanding was that it's really acidic. So what do you what's your thought on that?
Well, it is organic matter, but I would think it would be acidic. But I'd say Google it. There's probably some research study online about it.
And my permaculture friends use the albizia, you know, as a nitrogen fixer. They cut the branches off and use it, but it creates acidity in the soil.
Right. So what happens is the fertilizing effect of it, basically, it's a nitrogen fixing plant, right? And nitrogen will tend to acidify the soil. So if you if you plant that in this spot, I wouldn't recommend planting it, right? There's so much of it. But the wheat trees, go ahead and hit it, right? It's just one of the issues that has been seen. You know, if they're just hitting a wheat tree, then I can't say for sure what the balance would be for adding the organic matter right there. I think Bruce would be.
Yeah, the problem with albizia, it's got a high nitrogen to base cation ratio, so its net effect is acidifying the soil, but not all legumes will acidify the soil per se as much as albizia will, because some have better balances of nitrogen to base cations. So the base cations are usually associated with low molecular organics like oxalate and citrate. And when they get converted to carbonates by the microbes, then they neutralize the hydrogen that's creating acidity, so it's kind of a balance. But then the nitrogen, what happens is organic nitrogen gets converted to ammonia by the microbes, and when ammonia gets converted to nitrate, those hydrogens go off and make the soil more acid. So if it's a balanced organic source, then you're going to have maybe no effect on pH or just a minor drop. But albizia is so nitrogen rich relative to its base cations, it drops the pH way down, even more than eucalyptus does.
Wow.
And eucalyptus is not a nitrogen fixer, that's part of the reason. But eucalyptus does acidify, but not as much as albizia does. Albizia is notorious.
Wow. Well, that's not good, because that means we have a lot of land getting acidified.
So what counters that? What can we add to counter the acidity? Specifically albizia.
I mean, like trees like Gemelina are nitrogen poor and base rich, so they'll actually raise the pH. So, like they found with mixed plantings of albizia and other trees, then there'd be less of effect than a pure albizia stand. So, and the other option is really, using crushed coral or limestone, because then the carbonates will make bicarbonate, which will neutralize free hydrogen and stuff and bring the pH up. And aluminum, big problem of our soils is aluminum hydrolyzes water and then drops the pH down. So you have hydrogens going off, making more aluminum soluble, aluminum hydrolyzes water, making more hydrogen, and unless you add an organic matter to complex that aluminum, it just magnifies it. It's really complicated because there's no real generalities. I mean, so many things depend on location, the plant species, the mineralogy of the soil. Yeah.
Exactly. There are really so many different facets to it, but in a little bit here, I'm going to be moving on to the agroforestry aspects of what we can do. So these strongly acidic soils, for you all out there looking around at your places or wherever you go, you notice areas where the organic matter is very well defined. You got your some organic matter on the surface, and then you got your soil, and it's not very well integrated. That's a decent sign that it's probably an acidic soil, because it doesn't really incorporate so well into the surface layer, or into the mineral layer. So now we've got our phosphorus fixation, and I say liberate yourself through natural phosphorus liberation. So as you get down around this, 5.4, it's happening. And what is happening here? We've got iron, manganese, and aluminum. And as your pH is going down, that stuff is binding onto your phosphorus. And once you get down to especially 4.7, that's when they're really going to start hitting it, and then below that. But there are plants that I'm aware of that do grow in those conditions, but many do not. And that is when you start getting your aluminum toxicity. And what happens is the roots get stunted, and that's where adding calcium can play a huge role. But there's other things we can do. So here's some of the practices that we can do, and it's I'll say it over and over. These are some of the major issues. Number one is acid-tolerant species, right? If we have plants that are adapted to acidic soils, if that's where they're from originally, then there's a decent chance that they're going to do better in our acidic soils. Activated biochar. That's shown that it can adsorb aluminum. And it's also microbe housing. The microbes, beneficial fungi and bacteria, you can get those through Korean natural farming or actively aerated compost tea with select microbes. The microbes can help us to alleviate our acidity, especially if we have organic matter, because that can also bond with those aluminum, that aluminum, and increase our cation exchange capacity. And then biotill to break up that compaction, get the air down there, get the carbon down there, the roots, and then you get your microbes down there. There's a lot of fertility that is just waiting to be unlocked once we start using deeper rooted trees and then start this nutrient pumping system. And some of the plants we can use for that, a very common one is the daikon radish, and in our very acidic soils, it's not going to make seed very well. Could be a potassium or calcium deficiency, but pigeon pea can handle down to 5.0, and then moringa, I think that's 5.0 as well. Moringa is taprooted when you plant the seedling, so get those roots deep, and then that's how we nutrient pump. And once again, that casing ball agroforestry, and then hydrogen ions, as Bruce mentioned. So here's some of our acid tolerant species, and I will be putting this on my website, so for people who want to get these species, I'll keep it up for a bit, but I will post it on the website. So basically, what a surprise! The native species koa is handle 4.0, and as you go up in elevation, the pH can drop considerably, down to 3.7 at some of the higher elevations. So the native species are the ones that can handle some of those conditions. And then Inga, I'll say it over and over, Inga edulis is a great species. There's a number of them. It's nitrogen fixing. There's many uses for it. Hawaiian sumac, Hapu bajul, Erythrina edulis. Who knows what the pest is of the erythrina? Or the weedy.
Wasp.
It's a dog wasp.
I gave you something.
Yeah.
I heard someone else say, was it you? All right, we're going to give you sugar cane. So we've got all types of stuff here, many plants that we can utilize. Blueberries are kind of known for, but they're slow growing, they're kind of small, they need some support. Camellia, that's a tea species. Annona, cherimoya, atamoya, soursop, those are pretty delicious, right? Pineapples, blueberries, so these are all, this is at their lower, their tolerance. So technically they can handle it. It's not going to say that they're going to thrive in these conditions. There's other issues that we need to address often. Then we have, just running through it, our mountain alpaca, Hilo papa, the Hawaiian strawberry. It's a higher elevation, kukui, banana, persimmon, moringa, pigeon pea, chaya, Pacific spinach, also known as edible hibiscus, Okinawan spinach, lablab, tropical lima bean, poha berry, sweet potato, sorghum, corn, buckwheat, okra, potato, and then we get 5.5. You know what? The kukui is actually 5.0. Citrus, albiu, black sapote, loquat, taro or kalo, broccoli squash, leaf amaranth, canna edulis, which is a good pig fodder, and carrots. So iron and clay cowpeas, they're an awesome plant. Nitrogen fixing bean, grows quickly, handles those very acidic soils, but it's not so much of a food for us as a green manure or a fodder. And then also develop your own, right? That's one of the secrets is the locally adapted systems, locally adapted plants are the ones that do the best. So for hydrogen ions, and this is where I've had this need, I need calcium, or I should say my plants need the calcium, and so, what am I going to do? Well, here's some different ways that people have used, and fermented seawater is one way. And you know, this is not, I don't think there's been too much scientific study on this, so this is not, you know, I'm not saying this is the absolute way, I'm just, you know, trying to offer some options. Water-soluble calcium, that's a green natural farming input. Flooding, the creek water where I live is about 6.5 pH. And that was part of the reason that the Loki system worked so well, because there was calcium being carried in that water. Wood ashes, OPE shell, coral sand, agricultural lime. But you notice I put the lime at the bottom because what I'm trying to do is keep this mindset of, okay, what are our needs? And one of our needs is thinking about, you know, having a local production system, especially way out here in Hawaii, because we have some issues with shipping and whatnot. So here's an issue that really is, I look forward to conversation about this. And it's low-base status soil. Basically, it's as we lose all these nutrients, the calcium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sodium, even our acid-tolerant plants can have trouble because if you look at the soil test, there's like barely any potassium in the soil, and if you're not adding it, then you got to do something. So I've got pineapple and tea planted together there with a number of other species around it. And they're doing fine. Mulch is their ally right now. So we get into aluminum toxicity. We can get our koa, Inga edulis, Desmodium ovifolium, camellia, and buckwheat. Use caution, it may pick up the aluminum. Cranberry, blueberry. Then our biochar that adsorbs our aluminum. Microbes as well, organic matter, and then hydrogen ions as well. That once again, that's just going to raise your pH. So that's the fermented seawater, and the fermentation can make more bioavailable nutrients. Water-soluble calcium, compost tea, flooding, and maybe worms. I'm not sure if the worms can handle those very acidic soils. So Inga edulis can grow to 4.0.
So when you said aluminum tolerance, you're talking about toxicity. Is that from sugar cane?
No. Okay. So what happens when the pH goes down? There's aluminum. Aluminum is very common in the soil, but as the pH goes down, that aluminum becomes more available and causes a number of issues. So that's what I was pointing out before about the roots will tend to be stunted. So when you have a very acidic soil, especially at high elevations where it's very wet with well-drained soil, there's a history of we keep clearing without planting, then the nutrients get flushed out. And then you're going to have, and it's basically, if you see locations where nothing's growing, you know those spots where it's like, why is this soil red? It's like, something happened here, nothing is growing. There's a good chance it's aluminum toxicity. So the ice cream bean is a great ally because it can handle down to 4.0. It's nitrogen fixing, makes a lot of organic matter. It's also a multi-purpose plant with food, edible pods. It's got beans in here. Animals love it. Makes and it also is a phosphorus recycler.
Is that the Inga?
Yeah, Inga, ice cream bean.
And so the biochar, that's something that you do. That's something that you make.
You can make it or you can buy it.
And so when you make it, you choose an area where you can use a fire, right? Maybe where you
The best way that I've done it is if you are on a hillside, and then you can kind of like get a hollow spot in the hill, make a fire, and then that way you don't have to cover it as much. But it needs to be in a low oxygen environment, so once the fire is going, then you more or less cover it, but you still have to have some air. It takes a few days, and it forces mainly moisture out, and then the carbon will more or less remain. And it preserves the carbon so it can last thousands of years. So it's a good strategy also for the climate.
What do you recommend for testing your own soil?
I just go through the UH system. The Komohana extension. Yeah, just go in there and go online.
Okay.
Yeah, just soil test UH Hawaii or something like that, and you'll see lots of information. And the biochar is activated biochar. Big difference. If you just make biochar and throw it on the ground, it's going to pull your nitrogen. You want to get it activated by soaking it in a high nitrogen or high fertility environment. And you could put it in compost or a bucket with some like manure, tea, or something like that. But yeah, you really want to throw it, get it activated before you put it on the ground. So,
Does liquid do that?
liquid,
Liquid like water?
well, it's got to be.
When you
Okay,
say
I'll give you a little
compost
secret. Here's
tea.
something I've tried. Pee. Pee in water. Yeah, just pee in water in a bucket, and that worked. And it doesn't smell.
Activating biochar, as you stated, for a small plot like a garden or a flower bed is one thing. Activating biochar for a coffee farm or something else is entirely another story. It would seem to me that if you're putting it down on the ground and then you're adding something to it, be it chicken manure or whatever you've got your hands on, that you should be able to activate it on the site in the soil without having to go through this soaking process. I've heard this before, and my opinion of it is it's absolutely ridiculous on any kind of scale. You literally need equipment to deal with activating the biochar.
And that's, like you said, scale is the issue. Biochar, these are strategies, but it's not saying that they're all economical. There really are some major issues with the biochar. It's not easy for people to do it on a small scale. It's expensive for people to do it on a large scale. But I would always recommend that you activate it before you put it on the ground, unless you're going to do a little small experiment. You know, for a farmer, going and spreading it all and then hoping it works would not be a good idea. Because yeah, any experiments, you do small first. So I just want to keep on cruising here, and then we're going to get into some of these the agroforestry systems. So some traditional Hawaiian agricultural practices to address soil. Basically, I sat down and thought about it. I was like, well, what were some of the practices that could have an effect on the soil? And one that I thought of was makahiki. And that's the Hawaiian holiday in which we're basically, for 4 months, is a time where it was agricultural clearing, like massive clearing, was not allowed. It just was not the time. It was actually a time for games and a number of other things. But and what that did was, during the very rainy season here on the Windberg side, it meant that the land would not be opened up for leaching. It preserves the soil, and it's just one way where. For people coming in and seeing something, there's all these benefits that we don't see, right? We have our perspective, but there's all these things that actually science is actually catching right up. It's like there's all these different things coming together. So cultivating a relationship with nature, that's how these site-adapted systems were developed, where basically Peter Batusik of Stanford has more or less documented that a number of agricultural systems were based on certain nutrients like calcium or phosphorus, like in the Kohala field system, where it was like where the phosphorus was, draw a line around it, that's where the main field system was. So Hawaiians knew where it was, and it's basically like, why bother growing over there when things aren't going to grow this way? You grow it here, right? So you just develop that relationship. You learn. The Lo'is, they get the calcium that gets, as erosion happens, there's going to be nutrients being carried away, and then also weatherized and being liberated. Then our agroforest fallow. It's kind of a weird word, but basically a fallow. Who can tell me what a fallow is?
It means you let the land stand.
Let the land stand. Yep. You just let it go, right? So an agroforest is where it's like agricultural, but it's a forest, and it's going to go fallow with multi-purpose plants. So kukui is a multi-purpose plant, and so as Bruce and I had this conversation, he was saying, oh yeah, up in this area where he had, there was basically a hollow for 1 or 2 years, and then kukui was about 18 to 20 years. And kukui is high in nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, and sodium. So it helps to ameliorate the soil, make it better. It'll be burnt down and then replanted with taro again, but in the meantime, there's nuts that are going to be created within 20 years. Those are edible. They're used for lighting. There's oil. It's an ocean lens. You know, you pour the oil on the water, you can see in the ocean. So multi-purpose, and that's the fallow. And you see, this is one of those little things where if we look at that, there's a fallow system that's productive. And it's based on trees. So if we can mimic that kind of thing now, we're doing good. So we can burn vegetation, including ferns. They're a source of potassium, which we're kind of short in. Mulches, green manures, emu, biochar and ash, and food. That's the funny thing. It's like the Western way. It's like, okay, we're going to go burn this whole pile of trees and do all this work, use all this fuel. We're going to get our biochar, and then we're hungry at the end of the day. Whereas the emu, it's like the byproduct is the biochar. The food is what we're going after. So it's, you know, I think it's kind of nice that people can actually get production and you know, their needs met at the same time. So intergenerational specialization based on interest and natural talent. So I recently attended a talk by a gentleman, and he more or less was explaining how he has been given information passed on from a very, very long time, from one generation to the other. And that is a great way to preserve information about the land, about the protocol, about what's appropriate and what's not. And where to garden, where not to, but there's many different specializations. So those are just a few that I could think of. So with our input agriculture, where we have an increasingly high cost of shipping, we've got the Jones Act that definitely affects us. Labor strikes have occurred, wars have disrupted shipping, natural disasters, peak phosphorus is an issue, and also peak oil. So we have decreasing resources and increasing population. We have a competition for resources. So basically, Asia is consuming a lot of the fertilizers. The price of fertilizer is just going up and up. So if we let nature do the fertilizing, studies show that nitrogen-fixing plants can provide all the world's nitrogen needs. Here we go. I forgot to read this. Here's some ice cream needs. So
That's a big one.
and then there's one other aspect. I've got pineapples where you see that broccoli. Now they're starting to get the pineapples are coming on. And it's been this food forest growing up and down. I go through and chop stuff down and throw it on the ground. So I had this succession of food. Sun hemp is that plant there, the yellow flower, nitrogen fixing. But you know what? The sun hemp doesn't do well on our acidic soils. It does not really make seed reliably. John Mood, another farmer, he noticed the same thing. But, you know, there's lots of crotolarias, which are basically weeds all over the place. There's all types of crotolarias. And I found one growing on a road that was just rock. I thought, wow, that would grow well in compacted soil. So I brought it home, check it out. Grew like gangbusters. So, you know, you mix it up, animals, bean poles.
In regards to, say, legume cover crops that a person might be able to use here, I've had a real problem with trying to be able to locate any sourcing of seed. I mean, you're finding it on a roadside, that's great. You're going to be working a while to get enough of it to really do anything seriously with, but...
You can get a lot. With the crotalaria, it's easy, but I agree, we have some real issues.
Do you have any suggestions as far as anything that might be out there right now that's available in the industry?
Ice cream meat. That's
not exactly what I had in mind. I was thinking about growing it between the coffee.
Well, that's actually an excellent, it's the preferred tree for shade for coffee. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the tree for that. But if you have your system in place, it's one of the challenges with agroforestry. If you have an agricultural system with monocrop design with tight spacing, it's tough to then infill with trees.
I've got trees that incorporated with it. I've got about a maximum number of trees is my problem. I don't think I could put many more out there and still be able to grow coffee.
All right. Well, there's like cowpeas are low growing, and then there's lab, which is like a vine-eater one that would probably want to grow up. Pigeon pea would probably be a better.
But it works with pigeon pea, and it works really well. It's a little bit big, but it works.
Yeah, that's probably your best bet.
You said lab, and cowpeas, is that what you said?
Yep.
Aren't there a lot of people who are commercially selling perennial peanuts on this island now? Like,
There you go. Perennial peanut
Does
is-
anybody here have any experience with suddenly having all the perennial peanut flash and drop dead on them like mine did? The whole works.
No, in a drought, I've seen it die back.
Yeah. Nah, it's not, I don't know, it's in Mountain View, we could still, even as dry as it is, have enough rain. It just suddenly flashed. Okay, I'm the only guy.
No, that's weird.
Yeah.
So what about cacao? You haven't into that?
Cacao, 6.5 pH. So for me, what I like to do is start with like try to stick within your pH range because you're more likely to do better. If it's out of the pH range, I plant the cacao though. I love to plant all types of things and they're doing well, but it's just 6.5 pH. So if it's adapted to a higher pH, then you need to give it more love. And organic matter, you can give it lots of organic matter. You can give it microbes. You can give it lime. There's many things you can give it. So yeah, don't clear during the rainy season. If you want to limit your nutrient leaching and then shift to passive fertility, you can then disturb the soil as little as possible. When we disturb the soil, oh my goodness, I was looking at these studies about these hedgerow alley crops. What happens is when we clear the soil and plant stuff out, fertility takes a nosedive and it goes down and down and down. Eventually, it's going to come back up if you have deep-rooted plants. But just clearing the ground is going to cause all types of problems. So that's where the quasing wall agroforestry really makes a difference. Get your microbes. A fungal web can create or unlock and translocate plant-available nutrients to neighbor plants. Carbon sources. Get carbon in your soil to increase your nutrient pipeline. So, as Bruce was saying, with the albizia, right? He said gymnolina, get that in there instead. So we can get our activated biochar, which is a source of carbon. It holds fertility and microbes in high rainfall areas. Organic matter is another source. Mulch is a type of organic matter, but Agilis is a source of nitrogen and carbon. And it's similar to secondary forest for erosion control. Stick mulch. So basically stick mulch is, like I said, where you cut those trees about this high, and then you've got these sticks. What do you do with them, right? Well, someone by the name of Clive Cheatham has this pretty amazing lime tree and papayas, where he just gets a pile of sticks, and you know, like a couple feet high at least, and he actually has hono grass coming out of it. And hono grass, it's a tough one if you have it with all these other plants. He's on the 1960 lava flow. So barely any soil. He's got sticks and hono grass, and he's got this lime tree covered in fruit. And he's not adding a whole bunch of inputs. I'm sure he has a little bit here and there. Occasionally he said he had a goat come in or something, but the sticks really offer a lot. So if you mix it with the ground cover, keep it weeded right by the crown of the tree, you can actually, even on rock, get production, as long as you have your water. Our ground covers, that's a source of nitrogen, keeps the weeds down. Intercropping, once again, that's a nutrient trap, nitrogen fixation if you want. And I'll compare that to a monocrop, because basically, if you plant the field with the same thing, they're all competing for the same nutrients, right? They're all like in the same soil horizon, in the same, they're at the same stage of growth. So there's a lot of competition within a monocrop. It's ironic that they're trying to get rid of the competition, but when you integrate other plants in a mindful way that's well designed, you can actually reduce the competition with other species. Then we have our nutrient trap crops. So when we first clear, if we get something that grows quick, like corn is adapted to that kind of condition. Like the forest is burned, plant the corn needs nitrogen. That's why we have the dead zone, because we're throwing all this nitrogen on the ground. Most of it is going down or up into the air, volatilized. So we get our trap crops in the ground to pick up those nutrients and preserve them for us. Bamboo, banana, and then hedgerow alley cropping, which I'll get into a little bit. Succession-based agroforestry, get into that in a second too. Multi-strata, multiple levels of vegetation. Passive biofertilization with overstory trees, bio-erosion control, so there'll be a study I'll show you on that. Swales on contour, and then bird and animal habitat. So bean poles, I love bean poles in the garden. I love seeing the birds come on there and then poop. And I see their poop below the bean pole. So if we provide the habitat for the animals, for a farm, it's not really the best thing on a large scale, but if we start small and then we figure out these systems, then we can actually, or just trees, right? Trees. If we don't have a habitat, and if we have food that they like, they come and eat it and then fly off and poop away from the farm. And I've seen this over and over on all the farms I've worked on. Most, you just see the birds coming and going all day, coming and taking the food and nutrients and leaving. So vetiver is a great hedge in the sun, and cardamom is a great hedge in the shade. It's one of the challenges I've figured out over time here. How do we have these rows of plants that limit erosion in the shade? And cardamom is a shade-tolerant plant, does well. So active biofertilization, notice I'm differentiating. Passive is, letting it happen, doing a little bit of work and benefiting. Active is more and more work. So chop and drop of our hedgerows, inoculated green manures, working with animals. Fertigate, so fertilizer in our irrigation system with biofertilizers. And then banana leaf ashes have potassium and calcium. So there's many options that we have. For pest and disease, we balance our fertility and our nutrient cycling, because that's the way nature is, right? It's not all boom or bust, it's nice and slow. Design the machinery out, because the machinery creates compaction, anaerobic soil, root rots, and tip tieback. So the phytophthora root rot is common on avocados, especially in an area where there's a machine or compacted soils. So succession crop rotation, agroforest fallow, as I mentioned. Intercropping, white flies are attracted to a brown background. Get a ground cover in there, and you don't have white fly issues anymore. I've had that happen a number of times. Intercropping with pest trap crops, I'll show you that in just a minute. Aromatic deterrents, citronella and lemongrass. They basically fool the bugs or drive them away. Nematodes, crop rotation with nematode-resistant trap and antagonistic crops. So marigolds, sun hemp, that's Cordylaria juncea, Cordylaria spectabilis, sorghum, Sudan grass, they all disrupt the nematodes. Organic matter increases your beneficial nematodes, and then chicken manure reduces the nematode egg masses by 56%. So I'm not sure if that would be affecting the beneficials or not. I don't believe it does. So the nurse plants. Those are nitrogen-fixing plants often that are right around your desired plants, and they protect your plants. Often trees have their nurse plant. And the rose beetles, they need a physical deterrent, so that offers that. They increase our organic matter, our fertility, reduce our weed competition. And some examples are Inga, as I mentioned, the ice cream bean and its relatives. Gliricidia, also known as Madre de Cacao. Pigeon pea, cow pea, and lab. I wouldn't put lab in a system until the plants get bigger. That's a vining bean that can sprawl. So our biofilms, check out boundtea.com. Very amazing, huge plants, record-breaking plants up in Alaska. And he uses compost tea. And then Korean natural farming. This is Dr. Park was recently talking about how water-soluble calcium phosphate reduces the nitrogen effect and pest herbivory. So the pests know where the food is at. They like all that nice fertilizer. So if we're fertilizing a lot, then we're going to have more problems with pests. If we have low fertility, then we're probably going to have more problems with diseases, because the plants don't have the nutrition they need to support themselves. So if we have a nice balanced nutrient cycling system, then we're going to have a little bit less. And here's a great way to have a balanced nutrient cycling system. So this is Cordylaria. We've got our cranberry hibiscus, and like I said, Cordylaria, that one will disrupt the nematodes. It's naturally fixing. The cranberry hibiscus is a trap crop for the rose beetle. Does anyone have problems with rose beetles here? A few people. All right. Well, that one, they'll eat the cranberry hibiscus, and they'll tend to stay off your other plants. There's blueberries in here. This is at Kuliki Farm where I live and work, and you know, I just wanted to give a shout out to Dan and people at Kuliki Farm. It's been an awesome place. I get to live in a beautiful location, do a lot of gardening. If it wasn't for Kuliki Farm, I really wouldn't have a garden right now, so thank you so much. So we can get those in there. We can also do conservation farming. This is a little side note, but the mamaki is critical habitat for the Kamehameha butterfly. And Rachel, who is at Kuliki Farm, took a photograph. She's keen on insects, and that's the bite mark basically, and also the cocoon. The Kamehameha butterfly makes a little cocoon like that, and that is a photo of it. She had it checked. So we can improve the nature. Okay, so weeds, right? We got these rampant weeds, and this is what my garden looks like around the edges. This is my zone 4 garden, my outer garden. I let the California grass go crazy because I'm not a big fan of weed whacking. I don't want to have to deal with that. So I plant densely. I clear and I plant densely. That way I don't have to maintain it a lot. I also start small. That's Fukuoka's thing. Start small, or do your homework, start small, learn from your mistakes, and build on your successes. Mulch, right? We got to get our mulch, they say. Fungal-dominated biofertilization. So it's basically as the funguses are associated with forests, whereas the bacteria-dominated soils are more or less associated with disturbance areas, clearings. So many weeds are actually adapted to a more bacterial type of soil. And as we shift towards a fungal soil, I've seen this happen in my garden, the weeds more or less stop coming. I'm sure there's still plenty of weed seeds there, but I just don't have the germination like I did before.
So how do you create fungal domination?
Compost tea or IMOs, if you make it right. Stick mulch, yeah, sticks. Biological weed control. So intercropping offers that. Corn, beans, and squash, classic strategy where actually they can produce more corn within the corn, beans, and squash system. Their intercrop than can be grown in a monocrop. They have the other plants as well. Succession-based agroforestry, so that's like annuals and root crops, shrubs, trees, all together will then shade out the plants. So cowpeas, pineapples, pinky pea, banana, and then nitrogen-fixing trees, which are cut, and then crop shrubs and trees. If we do that, that's how we can beat the weeds. That's what allows me to not have to do that much work in my garden. I'm able to get it established, do a few weedings, and then move on, and then I don't have to do anything for about 6 months. And the garden definitely grows over itself, and I come in and cut it down. But it's a way to, at least I'm not having to kill weeds. I make mulch instead.
How would you suggest for like on a reforestation scale for weed control?
Nurse plants are one thing. I like this hedgerow alley crop thing, but that's not really effective on that large scale. That's a tough one. When you start working on a larger scale, there's some real issues. So.
Yeah, because I heard they're going to start banning like Roundup here, and when I was working in like Kaukuleu, they sprayed Garlon on the whole outcrop, and then the dead fountain grass they just left that as mulch. But now it's still like the soil was still damaged and stuff from the Garlon.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing is, yeah, just getting a system small and then developing it over time and building your scale. And I'm not working on that large of a scale, so I'm not going to give you the answer. But I think if nurse plants and then ground covers are one way. Yeah, I'm going to just dodge it after that, though.
Like a veil or?
What's that?
Like a veil?
Yeah. Or what's that one? That carpeting plant that. What's that? Elima. Yeah. There's a carpeting Elima that may.
Elima papa.
Is it the one like the white flower?
Yellow.
Yellow.
Yeah, so go through it.
So we've got our hedgerow alley cropping system. You'll see that in just a sec. So our Wainaku, right? How many people are dealing with Wainaku? Okay, we've got a number of people here. Wainaku is tricky, right? Because you can't really kill it. It's tough to kill. It's tough to do anything with. So the thing that I've found is shade it out and mulch it out. And I've had success. You know you're almost there when the Wainaku gets really skinny and reaches for the light. When it's fat, it's doing good. When it gets skinny, it's not doing so good. So that's shade and mulch will really make a difference. Bananas, nitrogen fixing trees, logs, and Okinawa spinach makes that happen. A pond liner will kill it. Pig tractor, so it's, John? Good. He did an experiment with that, had pigs do that. The pigs ate the Wainaku. The pigs love it, but they poop out the little cormels. So chickens behind them, or just picking up that afterwards. But after the pigs are in, you can plant it out densely, but there's erosion issues with that on the slope. Mulch, so that's just a lot of mulch, smother it. If you can't bring it in, grow it. Sudan grass and Cordillera, if you have a tractor to kill the Sudan grass, or Cordillera and cowpeas, you can kill that by hand. Or just pollards of the Cordillera. Or like I said, a mulch forest. So it's just plant things out. You can plant them on like 4-foot spacing. Plant lots of trees, fast growing, nitrogen fixing. That's going to shade it out, and then you can come through and thin so that you can take out every other row, and then you can then turn that into a hedgerow alley crop system if you want. But the thing is it takes time. Right? We want our food now, but if we have time, we can let nature do the work. We show up, do a little bit more work, and then we can have food later with a lot less work and inputs. And like I said, install it right? Get it in there, do a really good job, plant it out, check on it, do a few weedings. That's what I found works best. If you tend to a little bit, and when you see there's weeds, or if you see a plant didn't do so well, you replant it, get your mulch in, and then after about 3 to 5 weedings, I basically don't have to do much in terms of weeding anymore, but I do have to return to do some chop and drop of my support species or my food plants. So our issue, little fire ants, right? LFAs. And rumor is that the dump mulch has it, but some people say it doesn't. Supposedly the center of the pile gets hot enough to kill them. When I was in Washington, I lived in a very rural location, very remote, and I tried using cardboard and wood chips, and it took me so much driving. I had to drive like an hour to go get cardboard. No, it wasn't happening, so that's what got me to realize, okay, I have to use what is available. And I started growing my own mulch. So if we get ground covers in there, that's another Cordillera there. This is pigeon pea, perennial peanut. I'm seeing how, where we have the Wainaku, it's been this repeat thing, but it's slowing down now with the perennial peanut in there. So there's competition that's happening, but a much better competition is a forest, right? How often do we see big weeds in the forest? So then we can do our hedgerows, green manure hedgerows. That's pigeon pea that you see there. And it makes an amazing mulch. You just make sure you leave 20% of the vegetation when you cut it. And it lasts for quite a bit. So here's this, basically an image of the forest fallows that I mentioned here. And there's different production levels, but basically it's the least amount of effort. And then you can do more effort, and ideally you're getting more output. And so we've got our annual cropping up here, right? Multiple cropping. Well, I'm about to jump into alley cropping, because alley cropping is a pretty amazing thing. It's offering very many things. And what I'm saying is let's use succession within these alley cropping systems. So here we go. If we look up, we've got our biodiversity. We go across, here's our time. So initially we've got our little, say this is a clearing here, tree falls down. Low growing things. The trees start growing, right? It turns into a forest over time. It's into a diverse forest. But if we strategically plant out, just like nature with our annuals, our biennials, our perennials, ground covers, runners, shrubs, green manures, like or pioneer species, the quick growing ones. That's what all the plants are adapted to. That is what they've been dealing with since the beginning of time until we started fooling ourselves. So if we can mimic this, create the situation that they're used to, then we're not the ones growing the plants anymore, we're creating the conditions for them to grow well. Our intercropping systems start with a primary crop, so you have your goal crop, the one you want to grow, and then find the ones that fit with it. 1, 2, 3 more at the most, maybe 5. And generally speaking, they can be higher overall production than if they're grown separately. Here's an intercrop system that I made where it's cassava and yacon. And the yacon tends to flop over. So the yacon flopped over along the pathway. So there's 2 rows of cassava, and then it's basically the cassava, and then the yacon is about 1.5 feet out or so, maybe 2 feet. And it's working great because I have no weeds there. I haven't had to do anything there in a long time. So if we over-yield with coconuts, basically, whenever anyone grows coconuts in anything, the production is almost always higher. And part of the reason is the fertilizer and the tending of the plants within the coconut plantation benefits the coconuts. They have a light shade. So here's some dwarf bananas with a young coconut and ice cream bloom behind it. And I had recently cut down some nitrogen-fixing plants I had grown with them. So silvopasture, basically cows and coconuts is a classic system. Very often in like the Vietnam or Philippines, right down the road where I live, there's actually cows and coconuts. But we can also add forage trees and improve our pasture with some nitrogen-fixing ground covers. And they'll love it. So basically that's just integrating trees with animals. Now, just to summarize this study here, basically what they figured out with this hedgerow alley farming system, first they did a study on maize and cassava. So it's intercropping maize and cassava, and they figured out that there was greater loss of soil under the maize and cassava intercropping on the plot without the bedbug grass hedgerows, and it actually decreased the yield of crops. So what that's saying to me is that, okay, intercropping is not as good as intercropping with hedgerows. And what those hedgerows do is and it's just a row of grass that can handle erosion coming down. It more or less stops it when it's dense enough, turns into a bioterrace, actually grows up with the sediments. And those sediments, as they come in, they're bringing fertility. The plant picks it up, makes it available to the other plants. Usually it takes some time, but this is one growing season they had that success. So if we integrate that understanding with these contour hedgerow systems, this is in the Philippines. This is a sloping agricultural land technology system. And it's been used for helping basically poor farmers in the uplands on very steep erosive soils for growing like rice. These trees are planted densely, double row, and they're cut low, and stones are put into it, and over time it turns into a bioterrace. But it's a nitrogen-fixing plant almost always. Then we have our agroforest, so we have coconuts in there as well. You'll notice that there's much less soil loss with these hedgerow systems. We don't have that issue as much here. Okay, so our hedgerow, okay, good, I think we have time. I'm going to show this video, hopefully it's going to work. This explains this hedgerow system, and the reason I'm promoting this is we can plant these hedgerows out in our Wainaku. We can do amazing things with this because it's going to shade the ground, and then when we come through and chop it down, we're going to make a lot of mulch, we're going to release our fertility. So now for farmers who've been paying a lot of money for these fertilizers, now we're going to go through and cut these down. It takes labor though. Where's the ball? Okay, well,
Bottom right left is one.
Lower left,
lower left.
a little further, there you are. And it's muted,
There you go.
there you go.
It's up all the way, I'm not sure what's up. Okay, well, you can see what's happening. It's this little bongo music for this. So our trees grow, we harvest some food. It shades out the grasses or the weeds. It gets chopped back again. That's a pollard. And now we have higher production, is what they found. And this is from the Inga Agroforestry system, which is in Honduras. And they're also adopting it elsewhere with other. It's a native species there. So I've been really trying to find a native species to use within these hedgerow alley crop systems, but many of the Hawaiian plants are just not adapted to that kind of disturbance. There just weren't large animals or weren't animals that were eating those trees. So, but I actually am having luck with the Hawaiian sumac. That one does very well with being cut and coming back, but is not nitrogen fixing. So just about to wrap it up here. So yeah, you see you've got these rows of trees. The leaves last a very long time. When you cut them and drop them on the ground, they take a very long time to break down. That serves as a great mulch. For people who've been developing these systems, they ranked it in terms of the quality of the green manure is usually based on the nitrogen to carbon ratio within the leaf. So the more nitrogen, it's going to tend to break down quickly. The more carbon, it's going to tend to break down slower. And, the ice cream bean has a lot of lignans, which makes it this really slow process to break down. So we don't have as much rapid fertilization as we would with, say, kukui or with Madre de Cacao. But we may be able to integrate them into a system in which we have a quick one to break down and then a slower one to serve as a mulch. If we're just chopping it and laying it as a mulch, we don't have the immediate, we lose nutrients through volatilization, right? A lot of nitrogen, who knows how much nitrogen is in the air?
72.
78 is right. I'll keep going. There's a team effort. Okay, these are Erythrina edulis. Nitrogen fixing bean tree, edible. So one of the things though, that the Erythrina got hit with the gall wasp, right? And the gall wasp is troublesome, and so that's what we should think about is, okay, if we're going to be planting out all these hedgerows and hitting them hard, we might be hurting, we might be inviting a pest in to really knock us out. If we're dependent on the system, it may fail, right? So we got to make it so it doesn't. And so they're finding that planting multiple species of Inga, because there's a number of them, is one way to make it a more stable system rather than one that's dependent on just one species. So the pros are increased production of well-designed systems within our hedgerow systems. Green manure integration, so it's nice and easy, right? It's a nice row that's straight where you're going to go through and it's clear cut and very simple. Rather than in my garden, I have a very small spot. I have a home garden, and I have to get in there between my plants. It slows it down. We get phosphorus recycling, biological weed control, mulch, right there, so we don't have to go get it. We're not going to bring pests in. We're going to improve our soil conditions while we take the weeds out. How can you get that? Simplified yet complex agro-ecosystem with ecosystem services. So the downside is there's a lack of demonstration sites, specialized skill set to develop it. It can be labor intensive. There are ways to develop these systems so they succeed over time to more tree crops, and then shifting, as they get shaded, they're going to have less vigor, and then we can just kill them later if we want, and then have, say, like a nitrogen fixing overstory tree. But that takes time. So the benefits do take time often. It's potentially hazardous, and I've cut myself a number of times with a machete. Low base soils need more research and development. So that's one of the big issues is the hedgerow alley crop systems have not been proven on these low base soils because there's just not a lot of available fertility to support these continuous cropping systems where they're able to produce corn year after year from the same spot with no fertilizer. Those soils have a higher base soil. They have the fertility that can support it. So we need to come up with a different way to really improve our nutrient cycling and also bring in more nutrients naturally. So we have the potential for pests, as I mentioned, and then the big thing for a lot of farmers is, we get these trees and we're gonna lose our farm space, but they've definitely found a number of times that the integration of other plants can actually increase production despite the reduction of planting space for crops. So when we design, we want to design for the right species, the right plant for the right place. Non-invasive plants, nitrogen fixation, fast growing, handle severe pruning, relatively rapid regrowth, abundant mulch, and like I said, fast and slow breakdown. So Laricidia and Kukui would be the fast, and then Inga is slow. And then multi-purpose, such as Inga and Kukui, and Bajul as well. And then you chop it at the end of the rainy season. That's a great time. You don't want to really do it if it's raining hard. If it's raining hard, nutrients will be washed away. So if you wait till it's dry, it's actually when there's competition for water. So when you chop your tree back, you're going to have less competition for water. You're going to have more mulch to conserve your water. All right, just one more slide, and then just about that. I'll open it up. So here's what I'm proposing is if we do the successional hedgerow alley crop system, and that's with, like say, Inga edulis, pineapple, papaya, cowpeas, and mitsuba. And that's what they're doing down there at that Inga Agroforestry system. But then if we mix in our nurse pigeon pea rows to support that, just on either side, like 3 feet out, you can then, if you don't have tons of grasses, then you can plant it out and then use that just to shade it out. If you do have grasses, you can just keep things in rows and just plant the forest and then cut things down. So then if we have our successional agroforest, so short and long-term overstory trees, crop trees, shrub trees in a single row with our support species and nurse plants. You can also add in your taro or kalo wood in the same line. And for this system, you need the weeds to be out to have success with the pigeon pea and kalo like that. Your cowpeas, and then your ground covers in there. And then as it grows, you shift it towards a shade-tolerant understory, such as cardamom. Then we have so that's like a long-term system where you plant it once, and then the crops just keep on coming. And it's really going to reduce the effort and energy, the leaching, all the problems that we're creating by disturbing the soil. It's just plant it once, and it'll improve the soil over time on its own without us having to do a whole lot if we design a crop. Then we have our successional rotational agroforest. And this is kind of what I'm thinking might really make a difference in this low-based soil is if we have our crop system that's like a short-term thing, as long as being like moringa or papaya planting, you can have those grow for a few years, especially planting. It's really demanding. Then after that, wreck it. Bring in animals, have them eat it, trample it, stamp it into the ground. That'll get the fertility more available. If it's on the soil, it's not going to really be as available to the plants. And then they're also going to manure it. And then after that, a restart on that successional planting. So that's a way where we could be getting corn and other crops. It's just not corn year after year. It's more or less based off of the natural system of succession. And then our grass or herb hedge, and it's going to give us fertility. Relay planting is when you have one crop, and then you plant another one underneath it, or soon before the other one's harvested. It's a way to get roots in the ground before you harvest. That way there's always something growing. And then stick mulch with ground cover. All right, that's it. And then, yeah, so Friday, October 24th, come check out the Agroforestry with Climate Smart Agriculture, but I want to open it up for questions, and then you had your hand up before.
So when you're talking about doing like the hedgerows with different plants, are you talking about doing them individually in different rows, or are you talking about mixing them together?
Right, it's all the same row. So here's the trick. If you have a bunch of grasses, you don't want to be planting out a lot of diversity. You want to just plant out trees in a row. Nothing else within that. Unless you put like something right in the same hole as a tree, if you're going to be coming through and weed whacking and weeding, it's just easier to have like, you want some space between them. You know, like 3 feet apart or something like that, so you can get your weed whacker between there if you have grass. But when the grasses are out, then you can do pineapple and papaya, all in the same row.
I mean, I was talking more about like the hedgerows, like the Lurcidia and the Inga. Do you plant like a Lurcidia row and then an Inga row, or would you mix them together?
Mixing them together is not really, generally speaking, what the people developing these systems, they don't like that because there's different response times, there's different issues with the plants. You know, some need to be pruned more often. So what I'm wondering, and I haven't done this yet, is a hedgerow of one and a hedgerow of another might be a way to go.
Okay.
But it's just usually just a row of trees, a single species, or a single row in a line. And just think about access. Access is critical. If you don't have access for your weed control, unless it's a really fast-growing plant, there's going to be issues.
Well, I just wanted to let everybody here know that there's going to be another permaculture meeting at the Hawaiian Sanctuary, like a mile out of Pahoa at 1 o'clock tomorrow. It's open to the public and stuff. I'm fairly sure that it's based off the Agroforestry system to integrate that into Puna after the lava flow passes Highway 130.
Cool. All right.
What about palms? Like I have this one spot on my property that the guy planted this row of palms, and I'm kind of like tired of this palm. So I'm thinking about cutting them down. I mean, are they good mulch? I mean,
I call it hard cut. I mean, the palms take a long time to break down. So if you can add some kind of carbon source that's going to stay there for a while, it's more like, to me, I think of it like a slow release fertilizer. It's not going to be fertility right away for your plants, but it's a good mulch. What kind of palms? What do they look like?
they just come up in a...
Like a bush?
Yeah, like
yellow?
No, they're pretty green.
Okay, because it could be the Rico palm. Yes. They're often yellow with low fertility, or like low nitrogen, low magnesium. But if it's green, that's a good sign that it's enough fertility.
Yeah, well, I mean, as rocky as the ground is, it's just amazing how stuff grows here, you know. So there's something there, but I mean, as far as planting in a traditional way, I mean, that's why I'm interested in this, because I know stuff grows like crazy, but you can't, you know, there's no tillage whatsoever, you know.
There's actually a lot of fertility in the rock. That's the thing, is the rock is really an extremely young soil. Right? The soil has to break down the microbes, the weather has to break down the rock, and then it becomes soil over time. And that's why there's a beautiful soil on top of that rock. You have that very organic, very rich soil in some locations. So if you get tree crops, definitely trees are really where it's at, but extra wide spacing. Palms are definitely have extensive root systems, and if it's a clumping palm, that might be sprouting up on you. So you might have to take an OO bar to it or something like that. Tie it to a truck, maybe. I don't know. All right. Anyone else? Any other issues? Yeah.
So on the land that we just bought, we have this pretty large orchard area with some old growth, older fruit trees, and what we've been doing is like spreading out a lot of our planting of fruit trees, and we have a lot of guava in between, and we've been pulling them. So are you saying with this angle,
Yes, it's up
to not pull them and just to cut them?
It's an option, is the way I'm trying to put it. One of the benefits is you don't have as much nutrient leaching, and it is basically turning the weed into a source of fertility. and mulch. How you integrate it can be tricky because then if we have these sticks all over the place, then we're tripping on them. And I tend to put them in rows. I like to have like 3 feet from my row of trees and shrubs. I have everything where my pathways are 3 to 4 feet wide. Then I have my beds which are 6 to 8 feet wide with my tree crops planted in the middle. And then I can lay mulch and sticks from the edge of the trees. As long as they don't touch, we don't want to have like rots forming by piling mulch up against our plants. A lot of trees don't like that. But then I can then lay sticks and all types of things. And the results I got are pretty amazing. It definitely, one of the challenges though is if we're doing that, then it's difficult to get the weeds out of the situation. And if we're throwing them on top of the grasses, we might just be feeding the weeds. So if you can take out the weeds before, like especially the grasses, there's things like desmodium, it's a vine, which is a weed, but it's nitrogen fixing. So it's all about what your weeds are, and then once you address the ones that are troublesome, then you figure out a way to integrate those sticks. It could be fertility, but it all depends on the situation. So you're OP cow, right?
Yeah, because I also hear you saying that, like, I'm also thinking in my head that maybe we're just trying to attack too big of an area. That we've been planting our fruit trees like really far apart, and because we have 10 acres, but I'm wondering if we should be focusing more on concentrated areas and getting a system sort of down.
You get the most production that way. You can produce more in a garden than you can on a modern farm in terms of like output per square foot. It's because we can do a much better job on a small area. We can plant out our trees, we can plant out vegetables and papayas all at the same time, and then we have a veggie garden where as we're tending the veggie garden, we're fertilizing or benefiting, providing weed control. As we weed our veggie plants, we're also weeding the tree crops at the same time. The orchard model where we plant out a lot of trees often turns into a lot of mowing here. And that then, it's kind of tough to get out of that cycle. But, pros and cons to everything, because, trees take time, and that's, often that's one of the first things people want to get in the ground.
You hinted at a fire ant solution.
Okay, who can guess my fire ant solution?
No, it's got to be something that you can...
It's a plant. Who said it?
Inga, ice cream bean.
Yes, ice cream bean.
How come?
All right, so the reason I'm saying that, and this is just what I observed, there are nectararies on the ice cream bean leaves. And the ants and even some lady beetles in Colombia or something like that, somewhere they documented a certain type of lady beetle feeding on it. Basically, they feed the ants. And what I noticed, when the ants were coming down these trees, and their, I'm not sure what they call it, their abdomen or the behind was clear. Whereas I found the ants elsewhere had more or less like a brown behind. So it seemed like they're getting a clean source of food. And what they documented is that the ants on the ice cream beans protect the tree from aphids, which who would have thought, because the ants farm the aphids. But I really have very little aphid damage, and I have a healthy ant population. And we've had a couple instances of fire ants coming in, not right where I live, but around the area. And I heard of a gentleman who did this where he had trouble with fire ants, and he repeatedly was killing them, but they would come back. So then what he did was he killed them, and then brought in beneficial ants, gave them sugar water in the trees, and got them in the trees, and he said that kept the fire ants out, because ants have pheromones. If a fire ant comes in and there's another ant species, the whole colony is going to know about it. So if we have it's a team to me, so if we encourage our team, we give them food, give them shelter, and give them what they need to play good in our garden, then maybe they'll keep the fire ants out. I don't know, but I want to try it though. Got a spot in mind that has them, so we're going to get it in the ground and then we'll see what happens.
So what you're saying is that the local ants will control the fire ants. The local ants basically are ground-based ants. And you need to get them to spend more time in the trees where the fire ants are. and
I've got at least 6 ants walking on this ice cream bean right now. Talking about ground ants.
Yeah, exactly. No, they're in the trees also. Yeah, those. Yeah, I get them. They're in the tree. So, is anyone who's a new gardener here? Oh, you're a bunch of winners here. Gardens.
Yeah, I've been watching them walk back and forth along
Well,
this
those
stuff. They brought them
seeds,
from home and they leave them.
start with seeds
They-
over the ice.
You got
Oh,
them till they
start
get
with
on the
seed, yes.
table. They're not gonna leave
They
you.
grow well from seeds.
Stay
The
on
bean
the
is
seed.
edible. There's a number of Inga species, so that one I am very confident, but not absolutely positive that it is Inga edulis. So you really want to key it out to be 100% sure, but there's only a few other species which are very different. So that I'm pretty sure that is the one that has the edible bean pod. Okay, I got a few more goodies here. So I got to think of a good question. Okay, what is a Hawaiian holiday that's coming up? Ah. Yes, Maki. It's in November. All right. And that's sugar cane. It's just the roots were growing. Okay, who's been gardening? Okay, this is ideally for someone in Puna. Who's been gardening or farming the longest? So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you've been gardening or farming for more than 1 year. Growing anything, more than 1 year. We're going to go up. Okay. 2 years. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Okay, 5, 6 years, 10 years. 15, anyone 15? All right, 15, 20, 20, 25. All right, 30. Okay, 40. Okay, we're going. I started at 4. Okay, 35, 40, 45, 50.
Does that mean backyard garden?
50 years. For real?
Organic too.
Organic. Wow. Okay. Okay.
Well, if you're gonna talk gardening, okay, I'm still with you.
All right. 55. 60. 60.
No, sir.
60. All right. So we got some minutes here. All right. We'll give this to our elder gardeners. Anyone in coastal
Multi-generational knowledge.
Coastal Puna? Anyone? No. Okay.
We're a mile from the.
You're a mile. Yeah. Okay. I think. So I will give you. This is hi. This is an endangered species. This is a native endangered species. Actually, there you go. Yeah. And then. So you are.
One of the winners, thank you very much.
China.
China.
Yeah. It's got,
Yeah, beans.
here's your pill. What did you want? Jackfruit?
Just got done planting my first crop, so now I'll pass on that.
Boy, good. Okay, here we go. You want these are naturally fixing beans, lab?
This is cool.
But,
Yeah, this is cool.
This is the endangered one that grows on the coast of Puna.
Oh, very cool.
You want that?
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
give them away.
Yeah, actually, maybe, there you go.
You like jackfruit? And then this is cactus.
It's in a punky.
Yeah, exactly. So it has edible fruit. Okay, I think we should probably wrap it up here. Any other questions, comments?
How do I deal, what do I do with them?
Eat the white part. That part is edible. There's a white pulp on the outside of the seed.
White pulp is edible.
The white pulp is edible. The seed, you plant it sideways.
Do I need to dry the seed first?
Nope, they only last 2 weeks. You gotta plant them quickly. Put them in a pot. And then, don't forget that.
I just take it right out.
Thank you for coming.
She got into this years